All right, so we're rolling. So again, we're working our way around the horn. We are now on module 10, global strategy. So if you do a global strategy, fundamentally, it's because you want to grow somehow geographically. I mean, um, you might want to acquire some IP that a company has. But even if you acquire a company in Europe or in Asia, it's still a geographical growth strategy. And oh, by the way, look right below that, you see refresh the brands. Our friends at Facebook have just renamed themselves. They're trying to refresh their brand, but it's going to take more than just changing the name. But I think what they're doing essentially is freeing themselves of the shackles of social media. So we'll probably start to see them do more acquisitions in other spaces. All right, guys, so here it is. Here's the top 10 global franchises. We see McDonald's is at the top there. KFC and Pizza Hut, of course, are owned by Yum Brands, as is Taco Bell. We'll talk more about Yum Brands later in our lecture, but yeah, McDonald's is there. McDonald's, of course, started in California. They did not start as a global brand the way Yum Brands did, which is owned by KFC, or which owns KFC and Pizza Hut. But here you go. So what we're going to be doing is talking about the why behind it, the why do you go global, and how do you do it. So when you talk about what is a global strategy, it's a fairly straightforward answer. It's essentially a strategy through which the firm sells its goods or services outside of its domestic market. And so we know, we'll talk about Aldi again today. Aldi is owned by a German company, which is operating here. Trader Joe's is owned by a German company. Talk about that later. But it's made possible by the fact that falling trade and investment barriers, countries around the world raise their hand and say, yes, we want to participate in trade. And you just don't see a lot of protectionistic philosophy. You don't see a lot of tariffs popping up, although we have recently. But historically, if you want to jump in and do global strategy, you've got to open your arms to imports as much as you hope people will open their arms to your exports. Advances in telecommunication, we're 24/7, we're global, being able to access people morning, noon, and night. And then, of course, using these big, huge container ships to try to reduce transportation costs. What we're now finding, of course, is the supply chains in these container ships are presenting challenges. You've got a whole bunch of them right now just sitting off the coast of LA. We do know that Target and Walmart and others have inquired about bringing their own container ships across the Atlantic or the Pacific. Don't know how that would all work out. Don't know what the cost implications are, but certainly trying to bring stuff in for the holiday period of time. So the big question is why do you do it? You got a nice little market in the US. You're happy with your business. You're making some money. Your shareholders are doing good. You're feeling great about your brand. All of a sudden, you just say, well, let's see if we can go to China. Let's see if we can go to India. Let's see if we can go to Italy. So why? It's to extend your life cycle of products that you might have by gaining access to consumers in new or emerging markets. The traditional emerging markets that are no longer emerging, I mean, they're there, are China and India. The one big emerging market we'll talk about at the end of the lecture is Africa. That's the big one. And maybe to a certain degree, even elements of South America. It enables you to gain access to, or I should say easier access to raw materials to integrate into products or services. Now, the semiconductor chip issue is a big one that companies are trying to grapple with. And you look at what's going on in car lots across the United States. I mean, I was out over the weekend and went by a bunch of car dealerships and just could not believe how empty they are right now. There's just no inventory. So decisions that might have been made 20, 30, 40 years ago to make it easier are now blowing up. And so we're gonna see if we're gonna hold the line on this, or if organizations are going to pivot and make some big bets in terms of trying to bring supply chain partners closer to home. We'll talk more about that as well. And then, of course, leverage opportunities to create new competencies. So the whole idea of going global requires a global mindset, but it even more so requires you to understand what the heck you're doing. And so just like Walmart going online, just like Walmart vertically integrating with their milk plant, going global is a core competency. And Walmart, of course, has done that. They've been doing it for a number of years. They're starting to back off a bit, divested themselves of some of their investments that they had. But these are the three primary reasons why companies do it. And if we go back to our diversification lecture, this issue around just growing geographically here in the US also is consistent with growing geographically globally, where you really got to understand your business model. When Disney tried to go to Paris, France many years ago, they said, hey, here's our business model, take it or leave it. And the French, pretty much gave them a bird and said, well, we'll leave it. And so Disney had to go back and recalibrate. Talk more about that too later. So you got to really understand, does your business model travel? We know Five Guys travels, they're overseas. We know Shake Shack travels, they're overseas. We know McDonald's travels, of course, et cetera. Haven't seen Chick-fil-A grow geographically overseas yet. And they might just be worried that their business model might not work with the Sunday closing over there, et cetera. But they worried about that up in New York and New England too, and it's proven to be false that their brand does travel just about everywhere in the United States. Planning the expansion, if you're going to go overseas, what is the right country to try to penetrate first? One of my projects for my graduate students is really trying to figure out and pick, when you go overseas, where might you go and why? You can't just say Europe. Where are you going to go first into the UK? Are you going to go first into France? Where are you going to go initially and then build from there? Where's your beachhead going to be? Well, you ain't going to make money from day one, more than likely, unless you've already had some level of presence there. So how are you going to make money? What's your time frame in terms of a return on your invested capital? You got to figure out the capabilities to expand. Are you going to acquire, which is going to be inorganic, or are you just going to open up a new location or build a new plant yourself? When Tesla went to China, they actually built their own manufacturing plant. They did not try to buy somebody. Home Depot failed in China, and they tried to go through an acquisition. So there's no one best way to do it. You got to figure out what works and what's the best way for your brand to be successful. And then, of course, you never know what's going to happen. And so you got to be agile. You got to be resilient to whatever the market throws at you. So Home Depot failed in China. It's a do-it-yourself type model. You go into Home Depot, you buy something, and you come home and you throw down the grass seed yourself. You build something yourself. You do the job yourself. And the theory behind why they failed is the Chinese market, at least where they wanted to go, was not a do-it-yourself customer base. The Chinese, at least where Home Depot went, would rather have somebody build it for them. But yet IKEA's business model is you buy it in and you got to assemble it at home. But IKEA has succeeded in China. So even though there is some level of similarity in terms of what the brand requires, IKEA was able to figure out how to do it, and has succeeded when Home Depot has failed. And Home Depot is an incredibly successful brand. They have succeeded everywhere they wanted to go domestically, and have saturated the U.S. in many respects. So when you do your Lowe's paper, you want to be looking at Home Depot. You want to be looking at what Home Depot did that was incredibly helpful, and what they did that failed. And then could you learn from that competitive intelligence for writing the Lowe's paper? So here's the bottom line: is once you make the decision to deliver your goods and or services in more than one country, you become what's known as an MNE, a multinational enterprise. And so, most of the costs and the risks about being an MNE is distance. You're far away. And we are seeing that right now like crazy with supply chains. These boats have to come a long way across the ocean. And so the whole issues along that are creating problems. So, but there are four big ones. One is cultural, which is social norms and beliefs and values. If you're going to go to Turkey, if you're going to go to Egypt, if you're going to go to Saudi Arabia, will your brand travel, and will you be able to adjust your brand so it's acceptable in whatever country you're going to go into? The administrative and political side of it. So political hostilities that are going on, or the shared monetary or political associations and the financial institutions all play a role in that regard as well. And geographic, of course, we talked about that, which is the distance, the time zones. I mean, 24/7. As I mentioned to you before, I had an MBA student who works for Foxconn here. Foxconn has a manufacturing facility that makes ink cartridges for Hewlett Packard, and he had to be on the phone all the time with China. And so the whole issue around time zones is a big issue. And then just the economic side of wealth and per capita income of citizens. So again, when you see where Egypt or where India is, or where China is, I mean, they have got a burgeoning middle class. And so because of that, then companies are starting to say, hey, we can go ahead and go after that middle class and do good. So free trade, you think to yourself, not everything's free, but free trade is essentially where governments do not restrict imports from or exports to other countries. And you have these agreements that pop up, and you've heard of the European Economic Area. And of course, the UK decide to exit that, as in Brexit. You had the North American Free Trade Agreement, which Clinton started, and then Trump decided to go ahead and adjust it. And that, of course, is with Canada and Mexico. And so, but they're just like Brazil has always been a pain in the butt for us to trade with. But the governing agency of sorts is what's called the WTO. And it manages these multilateral trade agreements of sorts. But the reality is, free trade is a concept. It's an idealistic state, but most governments still impose some type of protectionist policies that are intended to support local employment. So when you think about what happens, or what has happened in the U.S. back when China started moving into the world, actually started with Nixon, who started reaching out to China, and eventually China started to do some trade. And as they built power, though, they were pretty much forced into joining this WTO, which you're supposed to have standards, et cetera. And a lot of people struggle with China because there's a strong feeling that they violate a lot of the agreements The book Factory Man is all about a company down in Southwest Virginia, that furniture manufacturer that had to struggle with China entering into the furniture business. It's a really good, great read. I actually had my MBA students read it for a couple of semesters. So, the reality is, we as a government, put in some restrictions, of course, with China, and we did with Canada and with Mexico, et cetera. And we'll see where the connection is, because it ultimately ties into GDP and how we are with our GDP. But China joined the WTO, World Trade Association organization, in 2001. And we export a lot of soybeans. We send a lot of other products to China, but we're importing a lot more from China than we're exporting. And that's what you call a trade deficit in that regard. So Brazil and the United States are two huge exporters of soybean. And so they're competitors in that regard. And so if China is retaliating against us because of the tariffs that we put in place against them, they can shift their business down to Brazil. But what you want to make sure you're doing is not putting all your eggs in one basket. Remember, we talked about that recently. And so you got to make sure that you're diversifying your supply chain bases as best as you can. There's a really cool term. It's called comparative advantage. I don't want to confuse this with competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is what Walmart is able to do and build as they compete against Target and Kroger and Kmart and those other players. Comparative advantage really focuses in on countries, primarily, maybe to some regard regions. But comparative advantage it's really an economic law referring to the ability of any given economic actor to produce goods and services at a lower opportunity cost than other economic actors. So this is what's happened when China really becomes the manufacturer to the world. They figured out how to do it incredibly efficiently, much more so than we could here. And so CPG companies who are selling furniture, et cetera, they all made the decision to sell their to have their products made overseas in China. So China has created a comparative advantage in the world of manufacturing, and not just in furniture, but of course in other areas as well. If you recall back in the Great Recession, when automobile manufacturers were tanking, we ended up as a government bailing out Chrysler and General Motors. We did not bail out Ford. And there was a lot of criticism toward the Obama administration for doing that. And his rationale, as well as his economic team, was that, we had always made automobiles since, the Model 4 days, and then General Motors, et cetera. And that if we ended up letting two of our the big three, go down, then we would lose any advantage that we had in doing so, because other countries would pick up the slack. We know the Japanese have done an amazing job in automobile manufacturing, and they have since the late 60s and 70s, when they were able to get their economy back after World War II. They actually brought a couple of Americans over who helped them focus on manufacturing and the whole idea of Six Sigma and lean manufacturing. Edwards Deming was a organizational theorist of sorts who went over there and helped the Japanese do that. But gosh, when I was in the 1970s, Toyota and Honda were phenomenal cars. And my first car was a Toyota Corona, and the second one was a Toyota Corolla, and I've been a pretty big Toyota guy most of my life. I've owned a Honda, a couple of Hondas along the way. So Obama didn't want to lose whatever advantage, and we didn't have a big one that we had in manufacturing. If you think about what we are known for globally right now, in terms of comparative advantage, it's really two things. Number one, higher education. We have historically have one of the best education systems in the world, and that's why we have so many young people coming from all over the world to study in our universities, because we have this reputation for doing it really well. So much so that a lot of American educators have been hired by Chinese firms in the government and Indian and South Korea to bring our system of education overseas. So higher ed and really the whole world of education has always been the envy of the world. And historically, we've done really well in healthcare, particularly in terms of the training of our doctors and surgeons and nurses and other medical practitioners. Maybe losing that a little bit, but I think where we get criticized in healthcare is more about the delivery and the cost associated with healthcare rather than the quality of healthcare. So comparative advantage is powerful. It's real. You think French, you think wine, you think Italy, you think luxury, you think leather. Even you can say different states in the United States theoretically have a comparative advantage in certain products and services as well. So comparative advantage is a pretty big deal. And when we think about comparative advantage, it's well above, the typical strategy person like myself, well above my pay grade in that regard. But when people get elected into presidential jobs and governorships, there is a major focus on the economy for the country or a particular state. So we've got our election coming up tomorrow, and whoever wins, this is going to be a big deal for them, going and trying to bring business to the state of Virginia, or selling products and goods that we currently sell to markets overseas. So this is a big issue, and it's a big part of the whole idea of global business. So if you remember in chapter 3, we talked about GDP, and of course it was a question on our first exam. And if you remember, just a real quick review, consumption was 70% of GDP, and that's what you and I and your moms and dads and grandmas, uncles, aunts, big brothers, big sisters, whoever, what we're all buying on a daily basis. There's durable, there's non-durable. Investment is business investments, whether it's in brick and mortar or whether it's in technology or areas like that. This is companies making bets. Government spending always occurs, and this is what our government spends, in the military and healthcare and social services and that sort of thing. And then if you remember that last part of the formula, the net difference between what we export and what we import. And so this is part of the GDP. And if we are importing a lot more than we're exporting, then that's going to create a deficit. And the 3 red boxes below, you can see where our deficit's been. In 17, it was negative 2.9, in 18, negative 12.5, and then 2018, 0.9. So when we think then in terms of policy decisions that our country is making, if we put in a tariff to penalize one of our trading partners because either we feel that they're being unfair or it's more they're taking and not giving, we try to punish them. And in some regards that could work, in other regards it doesn't work. But whatever we've been doing with our tariffs and our issues, you can see that it hasn't been working too well lately. Here's what I think. I think my humble opinion is that because of the supply chain backups, companies are starting to ask their suppliers to see if it would be possible to get more near shore manufacturing versus, offshore manufacturing. What do I mean by that? I interviewed a customer of one of my customers, and so what during the interview they said, look, we're sick of these 6-month wait times. Can they bring manufacturing closer to the US so we can get what we want in 2 to 3 months? This is a pretty big issue right now. And there's a couple of factors involved. One, of course, will be if you start up a manufacturing endeavor, let's just say, even if it was domestic here in the US, are you going to be able to staff it up just because of the shortage of labor right now? And then two, if you were to do it here in the United States, are you going to be able to do it cheap enough to make your customer happy? And that's a big question. And if you can't do that, then you sell it to them at a higher rate, and then they're going to charge their customers more for it. All of a sudden, you got more inflation. Of course, we got inflation issues going on right now. But I think the supply chain backups that are going to take a long time. It's not just all of a sudden over a weekend they're going to get all these boats to get into the LA, harbor. It's going to take a long time. And so supply chain right now is, to me, a central strategic, and I'm going to call it dilemma for some, but an opportunity for others as we go forward. If you were to look at, again, the semiconductor chip industry right now, Apple made the decision to vertically integrate, so they're actually making their own chips. And but they've been working on that well before COVID. I mean, it wasn't even COVID wasn't a glimmer in their eye. I mean, you don't do that overnight. It takes several years to be able to do that. But apparel, furniture, I don't know, we'll see. Part of me feels that a good strategy would be to deal with all this strife and conflict and sadness that's going on in Central America and Haiti. I mean, could we invest money to open manufacturing plants in those countries? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But probably could get it done fairly cheaply, create some political stability in those countries. So if I was president for the day, and trying to deal with the conflicts and all that stuff with respect to immigration, even though we've always been a society of immigrants, I might throw some money down there and see if I could convince a couple of our companies, big manufacturers who are outsourcing, to see if they would consider opening up their manufacturing facility down there. I mean, companies are in the medical healthcare area already doing that in Costa Rica right now. So it's not that much out of the question. You just got to get political stability down there because they just haven't had it lately. So these guys, China trade has been a huge part of what we have been working our way through. Of course, again, Nixon opened up our discussions with them. And there were some free market reforms made in '79. And so China really doubled down and got excited about it. China's GDP, was averaging 9.5% through that time to 18. They've been slowing it down a little bit because a lot of that growth was government was just putting huge amount of money into manufacturing, subsidizing manufacturing. And so it's been a bit artificial. We stimulate, but we've been overstimulating over the past year and a half because of COVID. But and this is a big part of the conflict between the Democrats and the Republicans right now. Just how are we going to pay for all this? And there's a disagreement in terms of the vehicle, whether it's taxation or whatever. But So China wanted to slow the government's stimulus and let their middle class take over, much like it is here. And again, 70% of GDP here is all about what you and I are buying. So they joined the WTO in 2001. They were admitted and was preceded by a lengthy process of negotiations and required significant changes to the Chinese economy, which they agreed to. And they became more westernized in that regard. China in the past 12, really since COVID, has been, taking a different approach, more of a protectionistic approach. So I don't know, exactly how it's all going to play out. But my belief is that the more interdependence that you have with different countries around the world, the less likely that war is gonna break out. I mean, in many respects, the Japanese attacked us because of their worry about oil and their ability to get the oil they needed for their country's economic machine. So Apple officially entered China in 2001 because of Tim Cook. And then, of course, the iPhone was introduced around 2008 or 9, and it was in 2010 that China really said, yes, we can do it. And then Foxconn factory was built. And of course, the rest is history. But Tim Cook has been going to China really since the 90s, and whether it was even before he was with Apple. But Tim Cook is a supply chain guy. I mean, that is his thing. And so, Steve Jobs and Tim Cook was like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so much of the focus of Apple since the 10 years since Steve Jobs has been gone has been focused on supply chains and enhancing supply chains and more incremental innovation rather than any transformational innovation, which is what Steve Jobs was known for. Part of me believes that if Steve Jobs were still alive, we would already have an Apple car either on the market or getting ready to go on the market. And Tim Cook very well may decide that that's not going to be his cup of tea. So, of course, he's been in the CEO job now a little over 10 years. And more than likely will take it for another couple-ish. Who his successor is, I don't know. Normally, you would think it would have to come out of Apple, but a lot of the folks who were brought into Apple at the level below him or who were promoted to the level right below him have actually left Apple, including the gentleman who was responsible for running their car program. I think he's gone to either Ford or General Motors. So China has been highly successful creating a comparative advantage in manufacturing. And there's no question about it. And one more thought on this: if you ever drive up to New York City and you go over the Verrazano Bridge, my younger daughter went to Pratt in Brooklyn, and then you take the Brooklyn Queens Highway. I mean, when you look to the left, all you see are these brick manufacturing buildings that went dark, and they're plywood, and they were falling apart more and more than have been converted to creative spaces and condominiums, etc. And gosh, I haven't been on that road now. I did it 4 or 5 times a year for 5 years while she was getting her architecture degree. And maybe most of them are filled by now, I don't know. But all the making of pencils and desks and garments and everything that was made in New York City for so long, that was our literally China. Chicago and Detroit and New York City, these were big, huge manufacturing hubs that were people who came from different parts of the world got jobs there. And So since so much of this was outsourced now to China, that stuff's all gone dark. And, again, maybe we can bring some manufacturing back to the US. I think that would be pretty cool if we were able to do that with really nice paying jobs. So here's our friends at Yum. Yum Brands, if you remember, Pepsi decided to buy this Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC. It was a downstream or vertical integration strategy, an IO approach to growth, because running restaurants isn't like bottling soft drink and even making the syrup for soft drink. It's just very different. And so they ran that and then finally decided, what are we doing? Let's go ahead and divest ourselves. And they rolled it away and did a IPO, made a lot of money, and boom, all of a sudden you saw Yum Brands pop out. And Yum Brands was really born as a global brand. And if you go back and look at that sheet, you had one of our first pages there, you had KFC and Pizza Hut, were in the top 10 list there. And so their focus is from a vision standpoint, building the world's most loved, trusted, and fastest growing brand in partnership with the best franchise operators in the business. So it's interesting, in terms of how these brands run. I mean, you might have a franchise owner that runs a Taco Bell, and he or she might also, run a couple of McDonald's. So people who are running franchise operations, it's a kind of a unique, interesting breed. And to be very candid with you, some of the wealthiest people I know who are my age were running McDonald's and were running Taco Bells and some of these other franchises, and then did an amazing job, and then of course sold them. We've got a gentleman here in the Richmond area that actually owned and ran 100 Five Guys for a number of years, and then he sold off the Five Guys, and he's doing other stuff now. So in terms of core strategies, you can see them down there for Yum Brands: distinctive, relevant, and easy. When they say easy, I mean it's easy to engage with them. If you look at Chipotle and Qdoba and stuff, I mean, it's not always the easiest. It's kind of easy, but fast casual. It's about the quality and not always easy. Panera, not always easy, but they're trying to make the customer experience as easy and convenient as they can. So you see the 4 core strategies there. What will you notice up on top? They got a 4th brand up there, The Habit Burger Grill. I know we got one in town. I don't know if there's more than one. It's on Midlothian Turnpike across from Chesterfield Town Center. It's pretty good. I think The Habit, in terms of quality, in my humble opinion, is better than Taco Bell in its space, Pizza Hut in its space, and KFC in its space. So do I like The Habit as much as Five Guys? Pretty close, guys. I mean, it's not as expensive. It's close, but I really like it. And I wish, I love burgers, and but I have to limit myself to only 1 or 2 a month. I could eat them probably almost every day. But if you're Yum, if you're the strategic leadership of Yum, here you got the big 4. So you got pizza, right? You got chicken, you got Mexican, you got burger. So what's next? Probably sub. What sub shop brand? And it certainly would not be Subway, but you could look at Jimmy John's. There are some private sub company brands that I think would fit nicely into this portfolio. So if we were going to make a bet, I would bet that Yum Brands, and they've recently bought Habit, and they've got to blow Habit out. So I don't know what the geographic footprint right now of Habit is, but they got to open up more of those puppies. So, but what are they eyeballing right now? I don't know what else other than the sub shop. what else might it be? Seafood, maybe. I don't know. What do you guys think? Think about it. That's strategy. So if you're a senior strategy officer for Yum Brands, that's one of the things you're probably working on, you and your team. All right. So what segment do we want to move into next? What can we leverage? What capabilities from the top of Yum Brands can we leverage down um, into a new brand to ultimately make it successful? So you haven't tried Habit, give it a try. So we've talked quite a bit about Aldi, and so we know they want to be the nation's largest the third largest grocery chain. We already talked about that. We know Walmart's one. They said that, and they want to stay that way. We know Kroger and all of its sub brands, Harris Teeter, and all the brands it owns out in California are number two, and Aldi wants to be number three. So they've been around the US for a while though, right? So since the 70s, and very quiet, but they made this push deeper into the domestic market, and it's investing billions of dollars to be able to do that. So this was published in 2019, and they said they want to have 2,500 locations in the next 3 years. And so Alyssa from my other section wondered, are they really going to be able to do that? And are they going to be able to get to 2,500, during that time? And right now they've got 2,100. So you start thinking about, can they do it? I mean, because they really have 13 months now, 14 months. So you're talking about 4 stores a week to get to that 2,500. Well, they're going to probably get close. I mean, Walmart said it, and Walmart did it. But look at this is really a thing of beauty. I mean, even if you don't like Aldi, I'm just talking about it, guys, from a business model standpoint. Look at this. Look down at your phone right now. Right, your phone is a unit, and every time Apple sells a iPhone, or every time Samsung sells a smartphone, or now Google sells a Pixel, or whoever sells a phone, there's a certain amount of profit that is generated from each one of those phones. And the same thing with Aldi. And so, but it is easy. It is, look at it, it's just a thing of beauty in many respects. I mean, it's got less than 10 people who work in an Aldi. And so this is the brand Aldi Süd. So it's out of Germany. They've got 6,816 stores worldwide, and again 2,100 in the US, and they want to get to 2,500. So they're rocking and rolling, guys. And if we've talked about Aldi, right? And all they got to do is look at all that open space right there. Okay, so 2,100 stores, all in these areas to the Midwest, to the East, and then down in LA. So what they're probably going to do is, gosh, I can't remember what year this heat map was created, but they are probably already moving into Las Vegas and Phoenix, and then Albuquerque, and then going north. So there is no question. There is so much room for another 400 stores. Question is can they get it done in a year? That's gonna be tough. That's execution. You paint a vision of who you want to be, and at the end of the day, are you going to be able to execute on that? And so, but that's what I got this vision, and they heavily recruited VCU. Don't know if they're doing it now. I've had 3 students, just like you, graduated undergrad, were recruited as district managers, paid 80 grand or something like that, 75, 80, given a company car, and put them in charge of 10 supermarkets or 15 or 20. I don't know what district managers for Aldi does, but so this is an international growth strategy. It just happens to be a company that's operating out of Germany. And so there's an Aldi Nord. So it's actually was two brothers, and Aldi Nord came to the US as well, but they didn't come as Aldi. They came and they ended up buying a company that was located in the Los Angeles area, and that company is called Trader Joe's. So Aldi Nord penetrated the US through an acquisition, and it's Trader Joe's, and we'll talk about Trader Joe's in our very last slide today. So your choice of international entry is, you can export, high cost, low control. You can license, which is low cost, low risk. So, you start asking about licensing, et cetera. You don't have a lot of control in that regard, but you're able to, get a percentage of whatever the owner is able to garner. You can get in through strategic alliances, through acquisitions like Trader Joe's, or a whole newly owned subsidiary that you choose to build, which is what Tesla did in China when they built their manufacturing. So there's different ways to do it when you first go in. So let's take a look at our friends at Starbucks. I am so bullish on Starbucks in terms of what their growth potential is. So you can see this is about a year old, a little over a year old, but you can see where all of the Starbucks are around the world. Africa, Egypt, 32, South Africa, 16, Morocco, 9, and Tunisia, 1. So you got Nigeria, you got Ghana, you got a lot of other countries in Africa, on the continent of Africa, that Starbucks has not gone in yet. So again, we'll talk more about Africa in a second. You see China, you see Japan, South Korea. So you see where all the areas where Starbucks has invested from an international growth standpoint. And so wherever you go, you're going to see this little sign here. They're going to be very open to architectural design changes for the countries that they're operating in. So, they've got 32,646 stores worldwide, and that number's up now, I'm sure. So since this is a little older, it's a year old, over a year and a half old now, almost. And there were more international stores than those located in the company's home nation. So they have diversified geographically, and it's pretty powerful in terms of their position. Howard Schultz, who had been the CEO and who had navigated this growth strategy, really did a fantastic job. Him and Tim Cook, I tip my hat to, as two CEOs who really figured out before others how to be humble and how to navigate and how to politically operate across the world, and at least in the short term solve the riddle around China, and pretty much have gone along with what China has required them to do. So if you look at the global expansion of Starbucks, 8,900 are company operated, while the remainder are licensed. So we go back to the slide around licensing. Low cost, right? Not as much investment, low risk, little control, low returns. So that's potentially a negative for Starbucks, given the fact that, yes, they've got all these global stores, but they're, many of them are licensed. So each store is not going to provide the return that a corporate owned store in the United States might. So what has Starbucks done? They've diversified into supermarkets. So you go into a supermarket and you can get, Starbucks K-Cup in the coffee aisle. You can go into refrigerated beverage aisle and you can get a Starbucks product in there. So they have diversified. And this is why, one of the reasons I'm so bullish on Starbucks, you go into their Starbucks stores now, and they do have sandwiches. You can get eggs, you can get bagels. But guys, let's face it. I mean, I'm in Starbucks all the time, and I love it. But I'll love 7-Eleven too. I mean, I'm not a huge, I don't have this huge palate while I'm only going into Starbucks. Probably for every time I get coffee, I would say, 6 will be Starbucks, 2 or 3 will be 7-Eleven, and the other 2 or 3 will be Wawa. For a while, Wawa was winning when I was working out early in the morning at Gold's Gym. It was just more convenient to go to Wawa. And before Starbucks did the drive-through. But anyway, Starbucks has the potential to diversify so much more from a product standpoint. Walk in the stores, just think if you walked into Starbucks and you could get, I don't know if you know, Billy bread, very hard, crusty, very delicious bread. If you had really high quality food products in the Starbucks, I would rate them 5 or 6 in terms of quality. Right now, it's all about convenience. I mean, if I haven't eaten dinner and I got to get a protein in me, or if I haven't eaten breakfast, I'll pop by the Starbucks, get a coffee, and then order their little egg bites or whatever those things are called. But man, on the way home, you pop in, you go to the drive-through. Can I have some Billy bread or whatever bread? Even if it's a little milk and stuff, and I know it deviates from their business and does make it a bit more complicated, but they've got so much room in their stores and shelving opportunity, et cetera, to put in more products. So they've chosen not to do it yet, and one of the reasons is they really haven't needed to do it. But very similar to if you're a senior strategy person at Starbucks, you're also looking at the Habit, or for Yum Brands, what's next? Is it a sub shop? Could be a coffee shop, for Yum Brands. But if I'm a senior strategy officer for Starbucks, I'm looking at diversifying more products into my stores. But Starbucks, there was an amazing video that was produced in 2011 by Bloomberg just about Starbucks and their strategies, and they were a poster child for this class. And I used it up until a year ago, and the YouTube video that's out there, it's just even started decaying. I don't know why, but it's just getting old, and so I stopped doing it. But part of me feels like sometimes going back and doing some really good case study work, it's 10 years old now, would be a really good, almost pure case study for y'all. So you can see how they've grown, in terms of the US versus international. So, Starbucks has really done a great job. Now, remember going back and looking at where they're at in Africa, Egypt, South America, Morocco, Tunisia. So you see Egypt here, 32. You had way down there, you had South Africa, and you had Morocco, and then Tunisia. But you got Ghana, you got Nigeria. So where else will Africa go? They're being rather cautious. We know that many of the big infrastructure brands like General Electric and Halliburton are already in Africa, building infrastructure, building water systems, telecommunication systems, et cetera, et cetera. But there's some hesitancy when you look at where else Starbucks has gone. They've been fairly cautious in terms of their penetration into Africa. And so we then ask the question, well, why? Well, there's risks. Just because you want to go global doesn't mean that it's going to work. And so when you think about risks, they're very high, especially in political and economic areas. So if we look at pure economics, you've got debt. So what'll happen is emerging markets will take on debt to banks or others, and then they can't pay that debt back. So companies make the decision it's not worth it right now. or countries like the United States don't invest. So guess what China's been doing is investing very, very heavily into Africa to try to help them with their infrastructure. And so we're competing with China right now in Africa. Challenges for countries to comply with their promises and obligations. There's an interesting story that Russia formed a joint venture with BP, and there was a disagreement who would be the CEO. It was decided that the CEO would come from BP. Russia really didn't like that. When the guy tried to get into Russia, Russia held up his visa, which then allowed the Russian executive become the CEO. So it is one little example, but many organizations just became very gun shy about going to Russia. And so Russia, which had this thought of being an emerging market, even though it's got a full economy and everything, companies started to back away from it. Uncertain prices for critical commodities, and then the threat of counterfeit products and lack of global policing. We see the political issue. I mean, this is going on crazy right now. Recurring tensions, instability, uprisings and wars, potential nationalization. This is where you bring something in and a company actually takes control of it. Security instability, and then protectionistic political views. So once again, this takes a real heavy mindset and desire to do this, but it takes a core competency about figuring out how to navigate all these issues. So there's three primary strategies. We did talk about the licensing and the strategic alliances and the acquisitions. All right, that's one piece of the pie. But there's three primary considerations when a company's deciding to go strategy. One, or go global. One, the global strategy is basically say, here's who we are, take us or leave us. And so when Disney went to France and opened up their Paris park, Disney went incredibly arrogant, and the Parisians basically shot him the bird and said, this, you guys are arrogant, you don't understand our culture, you don't understand who we are. And so Disney did not do well there initially, and then Disney swallowed their pride and came back and have done now a much better job when they've gone into other international markets. So what's interesting about this is it tends to be more high luxury, so like Gucci and Jimmy Choo's and other brands that people in China or Italy or the US, I don't care where you are, they want the Gucci bag. Don't try to mess up the Gucci bag. A Gucci bag's a Gucci bag. And then even with Nike, I mean, Nike, products around the world, and I've read recently that Nike shoes have almost become a currency by themselves in some countries. Or soybeans. I mean, the soybeans that the U.S. sends to China, you can be any different than the soybeans that the U.S. sends to other countries, or aluminum or steel. So these products, in terms of some commodities, some luxury, you ain't going to change them. So when they're made the same way to go wherever they're going to end up. So not a lot of companies, not a lot of brands can get away with this. But where most companies go and take is a transnational strategy. And this is a strategy through which the brand seeks to achieve the efficiencies of trying to be as consistent as they can, while customizing to local tastes and palates and belief systems and stuff. So, what this essentially means is that if you're a Starbucks and you go to Egypt, that you're going to take into account the Egyptian tastes, how they like their coffee, the foods that you might have in the store. So I haven't been there, of course, but if you think about what a Starbucks looks like across 5 minutes from where I sit versus in Egypt, chances are it'll be the Starbucks, of course, logo out front, but when you walk in, You're still going to know you're in a Starbucks, but in terms of products and maybe even a little service differences. So it might be 60-40, could be, could be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending upon the country. If you think about a McDonald's, we think about it fast food, grab and go type stuff. Some countries, you could actually have dining, so you make your order and then your McDonald's are served to you in your table. So transnational is a smart way to go. And this is essentially saying that, hey, we honor your local customs, we honor your local taste buds and the things that you like. But we still want you to enjoy our brand, and particularly given the fact that it's a Western brand from the United States. Even Apple, Apple has to adjust its phones to what China tells them to do or what other countries tell them to do. That might be with respect to apps or data or otherwise. So transnational is the way to go. So the third and final way is what we call multi-domestic. And this is essentially where the brand has no ego. You don't even know that it's being made by General Motors of sorts. So this is the Onyx. It's a GM product. Never heard of it before, guys, until I was updating this deck a couple of years ago. Best-selling car in Brazil. It's actually produced in Mexico, but it's owned and made by GM. So when we think about a multi-domestic strategy, and it's an adaptation international strategy in which strategic and operating decisions are decentralized to the strategic business unit of each country, so as to allow that unit to tailor products to the local market. So this is a little car. You go to Brazil, very congested. Sao Paulo, Brazil. My daughter was an architect there for a while. I don't know what it is, 6th, 7th, 8th largest city in the world. So this car fits. It's a very popular car. You see the little logo there, the little Chevy logo down there, but for all intents and purposes, it's a car made for Brazil. So we talk about a core competency. Like we know that Walmart had to build a core competency to go online. They had to build a core competency to become manufacturing. You have to build a core competency to go global. It's just, you have to know and figure out how to do it. You have to have local partners. You have to have people who are working with you from that country that have friends and relatives, know what's up. And some brands get it and others don't. Apple's done a really good job navigating all the challenges associated with that. So this is going to be my last slide. And it's the story of one of my favorite brands, and that's Trader Joe's. So every year, Trader Joe's is voted as one of the top supermarkets in the United States. And of course, Publix is in that list. Wegmans is in that list. And firm out of Texas, HEB, is in that list. And so, as we said earlier, Trader Joe's was an international growth strategy by Aldi Nord. And so they wanted to come to the US. So they purchased this grocery store, and then they've been off and running. And it's a quirky brand. We know it's a blue ocean brand. They differentiate themselves through their private label items, their quirky culture, and the private label is considered to be very unique and high quality. So they're doing a lot of revenue, guys, 15.7 billion. And they've got 470 locations nationwide. Think, right, the Aldi stores have 2,100. The Trader Joe's has 470. So the vision of the two brands is very different. I mean, Trader Joe's just doesn't have the aggressive growth vision that their sister company Aldi's has. And we see it played out here in the Richmond market. I mean, Trader Joe's is located out in the Short Pump area, and they finally opened their second store in the off of Huguenot in the Bon Air area. And there's always a line to get into that store. So they're very deliberate, but they're pumping a huge amount of volume, through those stores. I mean, for a store as small as they are, to be doing that kind of volume per store, guys, is like crazy. I mean, it's really unbelievable. This guy, who got the job to be the CEO in 2001, actually worked in public accounting for 13 years. And one of the things I love, when I think about executives, are those who are very strong financially, but also get the power of brand and the power of culture. And so this guy does. And so the reason I want to end with this slide is, given the fact that we've talked about it and alluded to it, you probably know that Trader Joe's is owned by a German company, but this is a multi-domestic strategy. If we go back and we talk right here, they have pretty much decentralized the running of Trader Joe's to this gentleman and his senior team. They do a fantastic job at it. They get the American consumer. Their primary customer, I was reading this yesterday, as a matter of fact, it was a great Twitter feed on it, is the educated consumer who tends not to be making quite a bit of money. So you're talking about educators and academics or creatives, etc. They tend to be his core customer, or right, if you remember Patagonia's dirt bag of sorts. And they've got a core competency, and they've done a spectacular job at it. And so Trader Joe's, in many respects, you don't even think of them being an international brand, because they just get their customers so well. So when we ultimately think about what the brand is about, we want to give praise for Aldi Nord coming to the United States, buying a brand, and then letting the CEO run the brand as he feels he needs to. So with